So we're just going to have a look at a bit of a fun project. This is called the running microbug. We've unpackaged it and we've got all the parts and components laid out, and we've got the information card that came with the unit. To read through, do the relevant areas and make sure you understand what you're doing and what you're building, but also check off your parts list, make sure all your parts are there, and also check each of the parts to make sure that they are operational, because it can save a lot of trouble finding later on. So as you can see here, we've got the printed circuit board, and it's got the component layout on that side of it, and there's the opposite side where you solder to. So the first thing we're going to put on are the resistors, and what I have here is just a tape piece of printed circuit board, which I use regularly, and I use that to get the spacing for the resistors. So I just basically set it up so it touches right the inside lines of the holes for the resistors, and you can see here that they're all the same. So you basically then just set your component up, or in this case resistor, and it just gives you a bending jig, so you got a reasonably consistent bend to your components, and you end up with that. So as you can see here, we've gone through and bent the required resistors up, and now we'll put them on circuit. We've got our resistors in their required places. There are only two values here. There's 4 by 100 ohms and 2 by 220, so nothing over complicated there. And on the opposite side, right, we can basically now just lay that board down and then go through and solder each of the components. The first thing, always clean your iron and make sure you keep it clean. And then just put a bit of solder on your iron. Again, keeping your iron clean, heat on the board, and then just bring your solder in. So the next part is just go through, right, your solder joints and make sure that you check each one of them. Make sure that they're bright and shiny and clean. Next thing you got to do is just trim off your leads. So just go through and just on top of your solder joint. So the next part we're going to put on is the light dependent resistors. There's 2 of them, one on each side of the right circuit board, and what we want to do is just put a right angle bend in those and then solder them in. So what I'm going to do is use my pliers as the bending jig this time, and that just gives me a reasonably consistent distance out from the LDR. And now we've got our bending our wires. So we got one of the light dependent resistors hooked up, and we're just measuring the resistance, and with most of the light blocked off we're getting about 30 k ohms. Now if I open that up, you can see that that's now dropped down to about 6 or 7 k, and if I put a light on it, you can see that it's going to drop down to a couple of hundred ohms. So that's how they work. So we've got the 2 light dependent resistors in place and soldered on, as you can see on the opposite side of the board.
Yep.
Next thing that we're going to put on is the switch. So the switch just goes in there as such. So what we're doing here is just following along with the instruction sheet, and after the switch, the next part that they put in is the transistors. Now we've got 4 transistors, 2 NPN and 2 PNP. So we've got our transistors soldered in. Next part we're going to do is our variable resistors, or pots. So the next part of the project is to put the rear wheel assembly on. Now what they're actually using is a diode that's supplied with the kit, and that's that diode there. So it doesn't actually play any role in the circuitry itself, but it does provide a spacer for this plastic wheel that fits in here. So what I've done is basically centralize the diode that is supplied, and you can see you've got your holes this side. So I'm just going to get my pliers and just that side of the hole. Now I've got it there. I can actually bend that at that point. Now that will give me should give me pretty much a center position for the diode, which it does. So what I'll do now is do the same on the other side. It's a bit easy to grab now because it's sitting up from the, and I've got to go for the inside and kind of line that up square and then bend that down. Now if all goes well, that will sit under there. Now they've actually got an orientation for the diode that doesn't really matter one way or the other. Now that we've got our bend sorted out, we know where to bend it. We've got to fit the plastic on, and I'll just re-bend that again. And so, oops, wrong hole. So it's got to go on the bottom of the circuit board because that's where it will be operating. That just works as a roller as such. Now obviously we're not soldering this side, we're soldering that side. You can see here we've got our rear wheel or roller on, and that just allows the unit to just roll along nice and easily, and we're trimmed off the other side. So what we're doing here is just putting some solder on the printed circuit board tracks that are running along the edge. Now we've got to fit a motor in here. We've done that on the 4 edges that are required. And I'm just making sure we've got an even flow of solder along there. Now this actually solders to the side of the motors. So what I'm doing here is just putting a bit of flux onto the motor itself to clean the material. Just tin the area. So I'm just feeding solder onto the side of the motor because we're going to solder this into position on those little edges. Now we're obviously putting more solder than what we need on, but not going to hurt any. And that should be it. So what we're soldering in now is the battery compartment. So I've just got the wires tinned and put through. So we haven't followed the instructions 100% because the step 6 here is the LEDs, and if I was putting the LEDs in which go in these positions here, they would have been knocked around and and possibly damaged, because I've got to get the motors in, then I had to get the wiring in for the motors, and then we had to get the battery compartment in, which we've put in. Now the wiring for the motors, you've got to be careful because there is a positive sign on each of these motors, and that ties in with the red lead. So we've done that on on both the motors, and you've got your negative lead. We put the battery compartment in, which is just a single machine bolt, a nut and bolt, and we've run the leads down to the respective areas, which is your positive and negative. So the last part we've got to put in is these LEDs, and the important part here is just getting your orientation right. As you can see here, they give you a reference with reference to the orientation of the LED, and your cathode is your shorter lead, which goes to the black mark area here, and that darker area mark is that mark there, and that mark there. So that's where your cathode has got to go. So we've got the LEDs in, and they're basically acting as eyes, if you want to call them that. But they also indicate which way this will turn with reference to the light. The other part that we put in were the little rubber feet for the motors, and they were cut off at about 5mm per side. So we've got the batteries in. It's all operational. Now the two potentiometer here are for the sensitivity of your light dependent resistors, so they basically set the sensitivity. I got it down pretty much low, and it's working quite fine. So if I switch that on now, you'll see both motors running because it's picking up the light, and you'll basically just follow around because there's light all around this area. But once it gets to a position where the LEDs are not facing the light and it can't pick up the illumination, then it stops. So I'll just turn both these to maximum. Now what that does is just make the light dependent resistors more sensitive to low light conditions, so it'll just operate under very low light conditions. In this situation, you can see it's going to take off like a Bondi trim. Switch it on. You can see here we've switched the main light off now, and we've got it at the same sensitivity we had it running with the light on. So to get it to run now, you'll have to increase the sensitivity. You can see that motor's now running, and do the same for the other motor. Now it'll run under the low light conditions. The LEDs are going to show you which way it's going to turn.